The Afterlife by Gary Soto, Chapter 10, the last chapter. Tuesday morning, the sky was gray as eraser markings on paper. I loitered in front of St. John's Cathedral. The pigeons were warbling in the eaves, and a priest was tiptoeing out of the parish house and down the cold, damp steps. He was retrieving the Fresno bee. He might be saying, "My Mass," I thought. It would be an easy day for him. I went inside the church and made my way to the altar, where I said a made-up prayer for Crystal, whom I loved more than ever. I have to admit that I prayed for the Raiders. They had lost after all. And their fans were now waking up with dark bags under their eyes. The poor sanitation crew was already at work, their hands gloved and rolling cans to the hungry mouth of the garbage truck idling in an alley. "Jesus," I asked. "Jesus, do we come back?" I shivered and let out a tearless cry that jerked my shoulders. I told him that I loved my family, an Angel, Eddie, my cousin, Uncle Richard, my friends at school, and those people I never met because I died young. What would I miss? What wars, conflicts, or miracle drugs that might bring back a teenage boy dying from knife wounds? Please, God, I begged, take care of my parents. I was an only son and would miss the passing of my parents. Perhaps I would see them in the afterlife. God, make it so. I prayed in front of an altar that was lit by a single sputtering candle. I closed my eyes and imagined the paintings of the saints on my 50-foot ceiling, which was cracked and rain-stained in places. When I was in elementary school, Mom took me to Mass every Sunday, and every Sunday I yawned until the mist of boredom pressed against my eyes. What intrigued me was how the artist got up to the tall, tall ceiling to do his thing. How did he climb up there? Or did someone tie a rope around his waist and haul him there, swinging side to side like a pendulum? Did they have a ladder so tall that it entered the Guinness Book of Records, or scaffolds put together like Legos? The artist could have crawled through the roof and poked his head there to paint those saintly drawings. That's how I spent my time in church, in wonderment. I got up and discovered Yellow Shoes heads down in prayer at the back of the church. Candles flickered behind him. And I thought of those candles as pilot lights for the flames he would have to dance around for eternity. In hell, an angry God would turn up the flames and roast this gangbanger forever and ever. "Cabron," I muttered, and immediately felt guilty for cursing in church. I told God that I was sorry, and as I bowed my head and whispered, "Forgive me, Senor." I approached Yellow Shoes, who looked up with a smile that was crooked on his face like he wasn't used to smiling and first learning how to be happy. I thought for a moment that he could see me, that he was mocking me. "What are you laughing at, pendejo?" I yelled. Yellow Shoes rose to his feet and greeted me in a brotherly voice. "How are you?" He should have known the answer to that. He extended his hand as a sign of peace. "Spooked!" I flowed backwards and hung momentarily in the air. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of the saints staring at me, judging my reaction. I didn't understand Yellow Shoes' sudden kindness in the shape of a hand beckoning our friendship. "Chihuahua!" I yelled. A ghostly face started to rise from Yellow Shoes' shoulder, then the neck and torso and rest of my body. It was Robert Montgomery. He had been inside Yellow Shoes since I last saw him on the bus. "Chewy?" Robert greeted. He pretended not to be disturbed that most of my body had vanished and all that remained was my upper torso and head. But I could read the sadness in his eyes he was feeling for me. "You scared me!" Robert laughed. He laughed harder as Yellow Shoes looked around the church and confused at why he was there with his hand extended. "Jesus," he called. But I didn't believe that God was going to answer him. He quickly rose, closed his hands into fists, and ran out of the church with his huango pants and his chones showing. He was running. And from what I knew of him, he'd be running all of his life. A coward with blood on his hands. "I was trying to steer that guy right," he said, pointing with his stumps. His hands had already disappeared. He didn't seem scared. I thought if I was inside him, I could work his movements a little, get him to behave and not be such a punk. He shook his head. I guess I was wrong. How did you know that I was going to be here? I asked. Sorrow shone in his eyes. I just knew, he answered, and staring at the front of the holy water confessed, I know your funeral is going to be here. He buried his face in his stumps and his shoulders. He was crying for me. He sat down in the pew, then kneeled. I lifted my gaze towards the ceiling. How did the painter paint up there? I used to go to church here, I told Robert. Yeah, me too. Really? He rubbed his face with his right stump, a sign that he was going to tell me something funny. Actually, I used to sleep here, but it got spooky looking up at the ceiling and seeing all those saints watching me. We admired those paintings that hung up high in the cold shadows. Man, I don't know how someone could paint way up there, Robert said after a moment. My face brightened. Others, it seemed, had the same question. I used to work here as a painter, Robert told me. Painted houses throughout all of Fresno, he giggled. I dated a gal who asked me to paint her garage. I painted the house and she gave me the boot before the house could dry. That's sorry, I lamented, but I had to admit it was funny. His smile evaporated. Robert stepped down and gave me a hug, and he foretold the future. I'll see you again. His face was lined with grief. Thanks for saving my life. I should have done better, a lot better, even if I was a terrible house painter. He turned away and turned towards the altar. He had to speak to God on his own. Should have done better, I mused as I approached the heavy oak doors of the church and floated through with ease. I think I understood. Outside, the wind blowing, I had a hard time keeping myself on the ground. I was like a balloon in the wind. I sailed and descended and bounced one way or another. Once I righted myself, I grew scared. A man in a Cackney garden outfit was setting an iron sign in front of the church. The sign read, funeral. I heard my middle grade English teacher use the word afterlife when she told us about this poet named Dante and the rings of hell he had to go down. I don't think anything of its meaning and how after we die, there's a chance we might enjoy yet another life. Who cares? I argued to myself as a dried up Bic pen started to scratch my name on the top of the desk. I wanted to make sure that I left my placa, my name, so that others would understand that I ruled that desk for a year. So what if I got a C in English that semester? What am I scoso? I was in the 7th grade. And it didn't make sense for Peter, a friend from 5th grade, to confess to me the day after his father died. A tractor rolled over him while he was plowing rows of cotton. He had heard his dad's footsteps on the gravel in his front yard. We were in a tree and it was autumn, like now, close to Halloween, because I remember that we were eating pumpkin seeds that his mother had roasted in the oven. We were in the tree only because it was something to do. Dog, we were dumb. We were excited to chirp stupidly like birds in a tree that had been stripped of the most of its leaves. Though 2 birds' nests, cold and abandoned, remained lodged in the crotch of limbs. We had climbed the tree to size up our neighborhood, eat pumpkin seeds, and I guess after, pretending to be chirping birds, allow Peter to talk about his dad, who was from Mexico and a hard worker with hands like roots pulled from the earth. That was 10 years ago. We straddled the limbs of that ancient sycamore, talked, and watched the sun dip blood red behind a feathery cloud. I thought of Peter as I left St. John's and about the word afterlife. I was almost gone. I had died when I was 17, and what had I done with my life? Saved a man named Robert Montgomery who died anyhow. But that was something, no? I'd also gone door to door collecting for money for research to cure cerebral palsy, 7 years straight. That too was something. At home, I didn't give my parents much grief. I had been a good kid, though my dad had to chase me with his belt a couple of times. Even my mom got into the action when I did something wrong, and she couldn't wait for dad to come home with the flat of her hand poised to strike and chase me around the kitchen table. A block away from St. John's Cathedral, I heard a garbage truck braking and then the roar of the driver yelling, "Stop!" He was one of the guys who had unwittingly given me a ride to Oakland to see the game. His name was Manuel. I remembered he was happily whistling, though there were bags under his eyes, his face recklessly shaven and crusted with blood where he had nicked himself, perhaps out of punishment for taking a day off to see the Raiders lose. He stopped momentarily when he came across the sign that read funeral. I could see him and think about that sign. His whistling stopped and his face became seamed with dark lines. He considered the sign and then continued down the walkway between the parish house and the cathedral. There was garbage to pick up. I flew there on a wind that was sharp as a knife and cold, and I headed toward Selma to hook up with Crystal. A romantic. I was loving her in my heart more and more. We'll be together in the afterlife, I thought, as I was carried along by the wind that seemed to be spanking me. I admonished myself for not listening to my English teacher talk about that guy Dante. Tonto, I scolded myself. I passed through Jensen Avenue with lots of lines and lines of diesel trucks and farm equipment for sale, and glided up Highway 99 lined with oleanders whipped by the traffic's wind. Tumbleweeds were caught in barbed wire fences, and strips of blown truck tires littered the shoulders of the highway. A treasure of broken bottles and crushed soda cans gleamed in the weeds. There were flattened suitcases, styrofoam ice chests, folding chairs and lamps, and broken apart sofas, stuff that fell off the back of pickup trucks. I came across an occasional dead dog and poor homeless dudes who looked like dead dogs at the entrances to the highway. They were holding up hitchhiking signs that would take them south to Los Angeles. Fresno was too hard on the homeless. I cut west from the freeway, and suddenly I was flying over vineyards and pastures where the cows looked dully at the ground, drool like clear string hanging from their fleck-flied mouths. I passed sheep, too, and chicken coops. I took a quick break when I spotted a llama farm. Dog, I thought as I approached the exotic animal. I had seen llamas in books, but never one close up. Their mouths chewed, but they weren't eating anything. They just chewed and scratched the hard ground with their hooves. Then one of them spit an orange gob in my direction. If I had feet, they would have gotten wet. Then, as to make further comment about me, the llama lifted its tail and dropped 4 marble-sized turds that steamed in the morning light. You furry little cochino, I scolded, then laughed. I leaped, and the wind carried me southward toward Selma and over vineyards and ranch homes. I flew across the bullet-riddled sign that announced Selma raising capital of the world and spotted Crystal's house. I slowed my flight because I could make out Crystal's father on the front porch. His head was down, and at first I believed he was crying because his shoulders were jerking. As I got closer, I could see that it was wrong. He was pulling up a rusty nail with his fingers, thick and as calloused as my dad's. His daughter was dead, I guess, and he was keeping busy. In his mind, the rusty nail had to go. 3 cars were in the driveway. I suspected one was an unmarked police cruiser. Just had that look. But I was wrong, too, because too soon the front door opened and a man in a black suit came out, briefcase in hand. The briefcase seemed to weigh a lot because a man's shoulder was slumped from carrying it. I realized immediately who he was. He was the man from a funeral home, and he had just conducted business with Crystal's dad and mom. Maybe he brought out brochures about caskets and headstones. I feared the discussion. Full of sorrow, I swung my attention away and stared absently at the vineyards where a blackbird on a wire was wiping its beak under a wing. Crystal, I moaned. The blackbird, done with its primping, leveled its wings and jumped, the wire like a guitar string producing a metal twang. Chewy, I heard. I turned. It was Crystal coming out of the vineyard, and she did not seem the least shocked that my body was nearly gone. But I was troubled that her legs, how beautiful they were gone, as were most of her arms. Her long brownish hair flowed, and the corners of her mouth were dented with the start of a smile. Crystal approached me with the stumps of her arms out. What a rare gift for an average-looking dude like me, to be the object of desire. Crystal leaned her face over to mine and gave me a light kiss, then one that was heavier, for her tongue touched mine in greeting. We clunked our heads together, bashful as ponies. Crystal, I whispered, my face in her neck. Chewy, she said back in a sweet whisper. We kissed again and touched nose to nose. Was a ghost ever so happy? We laughed, and then we became quiet when the funeral man's car pulled away, raising a long cloud of farm dust. We watched the car at the end of the drive, its brake lights deep red against the grayish morning. We looked towards the house, then when the front door closed with a click, Crystal's father was gone, the blackbird that I had seen earlier settled on the rail. The bird cleaned itself again, but beat its wings and lifted skyward when the door opened. Crystal's mother, shrugging into a coat, came out. She shaded her eyes as if she was looking for her daughter and not finding her. I began to tend to a potted plant's dead petals. I let Crystal pull in all of the images of her mother that she could. I watched her take her in as if for the last time, her mother's dark hair, her face, her hands, methodically pinching at the dead flowers. Her mother then shaded her eyes and stared far away. Oh, Mother, Crystal moaned. I lowered my head. I lowered my head. 2 ants were carrying a feathery seed that was 3 times bigger than them. The little guys had courage and purpose. I waited a patient 5 minutes before saying, "Let's go." We turned, floated a few inches from the ground, and found ourselves at the side of the house. Once more, I inspected the faucet where I had washed my face after the wasp's stings. I gazed up at the barn where the abandoned honeycomb nests mostly remained. Chewy, Crystal volunteered, I missed you. I swallowed that tender declaration. I missed you too. God, I wish I knew. She cut me off as if she could read my mind and said, but you know me now. Our deaths would be remembered by our families and a few friends who might think of us as they drove the streets of Fresno and Selma. Let them remember us as okay kids, both of us long-distance runners who didn't get very far. We leapt into the air and the wind took us. Where are we going? Crystal asked. Her hair swirled in front of her face, which was pink from the cold wind. I smiled at her. Let's check it out, I answered without fear as we sailed over the farm and over a farm that was like hers and full of grapevines. They say that autumn is the color of death. And for me and Crystal, it was true. We were like the lint of fallen leaves, grass burnt by the first frost, and then ashen-colored fog that sometimes rises from the valley floor and smothers our dreams. My dream had been to grow up and work a regular job, nothing special, hang out with friends, and be with someone special like Crystal. I received a portion of that dream and felt grateful for it. I loved her like no other. She flew at my side southwards towards what I now knew is called the afterlife.